There's something sacred about Sunday mornings, or at least there used to be. For years, they were our one untouched pocket of time. No work calls, no obligations, just silence and sun filtering through the blinds while we sipped coffee and caught up on nothing in particular. It was the closest thing to peace I knew. So when I walked into our home studio that Sunday morning, I expected more of the same. Instead, I walked into a scene that knocked something loose in my chest. Laura stood near the table, back slightly turned, clearing 2 mugs. Not 1, 2. That wouldn't have meant anything, except one of the mugs had Zach's initials etched on the side, ZR. A gift I gave him 3 birthdays ago when we were still close enough for inside jokes and surprise parties. I hadn't seen that mug in months. Seeing it now in our home on a random Sunday morning sent a slow chill crawling up my spine. And then I saw it. Zach's black bomber jacket. Familiar, scuffed at the collar, draped over the studio chair like he had just stepped out to take a call. My breath caught for half a second. I masked it with a forced yawn as I leaned in the doorway. Zach was here? I asked casually, like I hadn't just spotted a crack forming in the wall of my marriage. Laura didn't flinch. She placed the mugs in the sink, rinsed them with a little too much focus, and said, "Yeah, he came by early to talk about some investment project." Investment? I echoed, not out of suspicion yet, but just surprise. Zach wasn't exactly the Wall Street type. He worked odd jobs, mostly contract stuff. Not the kind of guy who'd schedule an early morning pitch about mutual funds. What kind of project? She shrugged, still not turning to face me. You know Zach. He's always got something cooking. This time it's a studio rental/artist collective thing. He needed feedback. That's all. Aha. I stepped a little further into the room. At 7 in the morning? This time she turned. Her smile was wide, but her eyes didn't match it. "You're so paranoid," she said, a short laugh escaping her. "You always do this. See something and spin it into a whole story." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I've known Laura for almost a decade. I know the way she twirls her ring when she's nervous. I know how her voice dips a half octave when she's hiding something. And I know her hands, steady as a surgeon's when she's relaxed. Right now they were trembling. Barely, but enough. She noticed me watching. Her smile dimmed, then returned even brighter, like turning up a lamp to cover a power flicker. "I told him you'd still be asleep," she added, as if that explained everything. "I usually am," I said slowly, nodding. "But not today." Silence stretched between us. The kind of silence that isn't comfortable. More like a waiting room before bad news. She moved past me to grab her phone from the charging station. Her movements too swift to be natural. Could have asked more. Pressed her. But instead, I just nodded and walked to the other side of the studio. My hands moved automatically, flipping through audio files, checking levels, pretending to be interested in things I couldn't focus on. Because in that moment, doubt had already started whispering in my ear. It wasn't just the coffee mug or the jacket or the timing. It was how she didn't ask if I wanted to join the conversation. How she didn't mention Zach stopping by when we spoke last night. How she seemed off. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Zach and I had always been close. Laura and Zach got along, maybe too well but still within reason. They joked around, teased each other, shared playlists. Maybe it was nothing, but nothing didn't feel like this. Later that morning, she asked if I wanted to go on a grocery run. It was something we used to do together, turn into a little weekend errand date. But this time it felt like a performance, like she was trying to play normal so I wouldn't look too hard at the cracks. In the car, I watched her fingers tap lightly on the steering wheel to a song she didn't even like. I asked again about the project Zach brought up. She said she didn't know many details, that he was still figuring it out. She offered no specifics, no anecdotes, just enough to fill the air. I let the topic die. That night, after we got home and she went upstairs to take a bath, I sat alone on the studio couch and stared at that mug again. It was still in the sink. Not washed, just sitting there like a taunt. I thought about all the little things I had dismissed over the last few months. How Zach started coming around more often. How Laura had started dressing up even for casual days. How she laughed harder at his jokes than mine. And I hated myself for thinking that way, for being that guy, the jealous husband, the one who reads into everything because he's too insecure to just trust. But there was a difference between paranoia and pattern recognition. And deep down, I knew something had shifted. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay next to her in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her breath. Slow, steady, like she didn't have a single thing on her conscience. She turned over in her sleep and rested a hand on my chest. That used to comfort me, but now it felt heavy, like an anchor. The thing about suspicion is it rarely shouts. It whispers, quietly, relentlessly, like a slow leak in the back of your mind. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. You start retracing your steps, reanalyzing moments you thought were harmless at the time. You start to see things for what they really were or what they might have been. After that Sunday morning with the mugs and the jacket, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Laura didn't bring Zach up again, and I didn't press it. But I started remembering things. Old things. Little things I'd brushed off. Like how at our last family barbecue, Laura and Zach stood off to the side, laughing about something no one else was part of. When I walked over, they stopped, said it was just a dumb joke. I laughed with them, but I remember the way they looked at each other. A look I didn't recognize, not between siblings-in-law. Or how Zach once brought up an inside joke at Thanksgiving. Something about the yoga studio parking lot. And Laura turned beet red, said he was making stuff up again. Everyone laughed, and I let it go. But now I wonder what that actually meant. I noticed how Laura had started wearing perfume to run errands. She'd spritz it on before heading to help Zach with paperwork at his office. I didn't even understand what paperwork she was helping with. Zach ran a construction company, not a law firm. Laura worked in early childhood development. What was she organizing? Blueprints? I'd ask her and she'd shrug it off. He just needs help keeping things tidy. You know how disorganized he is. That wasn't a lie. Zach was a mess when it came to admin stuff. But still, why her? Why so often? Why for hours? Then there was the lingerie. I found a new set stuffed in the back of her dresser. Still in the bag. Black lace, nothing like what she usually wore. I stood there holding it like it was radioactive. We hadn't been in made in weeks, maybe longer, and even when we were, things felt mechanical. Like she was going through the motions to avoid questions. When I brought it up, tried to joke, planning something I should know about, she just smiled and said, "Oh, it was on sale. Figured I'd surprise you later." But later never came. Another time, I got into her car to move it from the driveway and spotted a small bag wedged under the seat. Inside was a stick of men's deodorant, same brand Zach uses. I took it out, held it up when she came out of the house. She barely blinked. "Oh, I bought that for you. You were out. I forgot to bring it inside." That could have been true. Probably was the most reasonable explanation. But something about her answer, the way it came a beat too quick, the way she avoided eye contact, made it feel rehearsed. Like she had practiced the line in her head just in case I asked. She started locking her phone more often. Not just locking it, but flipping it face down every time it buzzed. When I'd ask who it was, she'd say just work stuff. Or Maya being dramatic again, referring to one of her coworkers. But I stopped believing her. I stopped believing a lot of things. Once, I walked into the room while she was texting and caught a glimpse of the name, Zach, at the top of the screen. She swiped it away so fast I almost thought I imagined it. Later that night, I checked her phone while she was asleep. Nothing from Zach. Not a single thread. Deleted. Every message. That scared me more than if I'd seen something. People only delete things when they have something to hide. I wish I could say I confronted her then and there, demanded the truth, forced it all into the light. But I didn't. I told myself I needed more. More signs. More evidence. More certainty. But maybe the truth was I didn't want to hear her confirm what I already knew deep down. I started avoiding home when I could. Stayed late at work. Volunteered to help friends move, paint, whatever excuse I could come up with to be elsewhere. Because every time I walked through that front door and saw her smile, I didn't know whether I was looking at my wife or a stranger wearing her skin. One night, I came home earlier than expected. Her car was in the driveway, lights off in the house. I stepped inside quietly, figuring she was asleep. But then I heard laughter. Soft, muffled, coming from the studio. I crept down the hallway, my heart hammering like a war drum. As I approached, the laughter stopped. The door opened before I reached it, and there she was, phone in hand, cheeks flushed. "Oh," she said, blinking. "Didn't hear you come in." "Who were you talking to?" She hesitated, just for a second. "No one. Just watching something dumb on TikTok." Her phone was already locked. I couldn't prove she was lying, but I knew. Eventually, I stopped asking, stopped pushing. Every question felt like a trap with no good outcome. If she told the truth, it would break me. If she lied, I'd know. Either way, I was alone. And the worst part? It wasn't just Laura I felt betrayed by. It was Zach, my brother, my own blood. He had keys to our house. Used to stop by unannounced, crash on the couch when things got bad with his ex. I never questioned it. Never thought twice. He was the only family I had left nearby. We grew up watching out for each other. Now I found myself watching him. Watching the way he'd touch Laura's arm when he laughed. The way he'd compliment her outfits. The private smiles they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. And I hated myself for it. I hated the version of me I was becoming, suspicious, paranoid, jealous. But even more than that, I hated how easily they made me feel crazy. Because that's the trick about betrayal. It doesn't always come with sirens and confessions. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, just enough to make you question your own grip on reality. And by the time you realize you were right all along, it's already too late. It happened in front of everyone. Maybe that's what broke me the most. How public it was. Like they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. As if my role in this whole twisted drama had expired, and no one bothered to let me know. It was my parents' anniversary dinner. A nice little gathering at a rustic Italian place they loved. White linen tablecloths, candles, too much wine. We were all there. My parents, Laura, Zach, a couple of old friends from the neighborhood. The usual crew. I should have felt safe in that room, surrounded by the people who were supposed to know me best. But from the moment Laura walked in, something was off. She looked different. Done up in a way she hadn't been for me in a long time. Hair perfectly styled, makeup just bold enough to look deliberate. A red dress, fitted, sleek, not her usual choice for a family dinner. And she wore heels. Laura never wore heels unless she was trying to be seen. When Zach arrived, late like always, he walked straight over to her first. Gave her a hug that lingered a second too long. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I did. I saw the way her hand brushed his arm, light and casual. Like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Like muscle memory. I stayed quiet. Sat through the appetizers, the wine refills, the small talk about work and house renovations, and my mom's new obsession with succulents. But I was barely there. I was watching. Not just them, but the way everyone else behaved. How no one questioned it. How it was suddenly normal for Laura and Zach to exchange private smiles across the table. Normal for them to have inside jokes that didn't include me. Then came the toast. Zach stood up toward the end of the night, glass in hand, leaning slightly on the back of Laura's chair. He didn't even touch mine. He cleared his throat and gave this little grin, half sheepish, half smug. "I just want to say," he began, voice a little too loud, "that love, real love, isn't always easy. Sometimes it comes at the wrong time or in the wrong way. But it still finds you. And when it does, the hardest decisions end up being the right ones." Everyone clapped politely, raised their glasses. But I didn't move. I stared at him, then at her. She didn't flinch, didn't look down in embarrassment. She didn't even pretend not to understand. She just sipped her wine, slow and deliberate, like it was any other toast, like it wasn't a bomb dropped in the middle of the room. After dinner, people filtered out to the parking lot. Hugs, goodbyes, promises to do this more often. I told my parents I'd catch up in a minute, then walked around the corner of the restaurant to where Zach's car was parked. And there they were, leaning against the passenger door, faces close. Too close. He was holding her hand. Not in the brother-in-law, thanks for the support kind of way. No. His fingers were interlaced with hers, like they were clinging to something private, something sacred, something that used to belong to me. I froze for a second, just watched. My stomach knotted, my hands clenched. I could have turned around. I could have walked away and kept pretending, but something in me snapped. I stepped forward, shoes crunching on gravel. They both looked up. Laura's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time in months, she didn't fake surprise. She didn't fumble for an excuse. She didn't even pull her hand away. Instead, she just looked at me and said, in a voice I'll never forget, "You deserve someone else anyway." It hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. No emotion, no regret, just that blank finality in her tone. Like she had already made her peace with whatever fallout would come. Like I was the last one to realize the game was over. I looked at Zach. My brother. The kid I used to build blanket forts with. The guy who crashed on my couch for 3 months when his life fell apart. He couldn't even meet my eyes. "Seriously?" I asked. My voice cracked a little, but I didn't care. "This is how you do it? After everything?" He opened his mouth, probably to offer some half-baked explanation. But I didn't want it. I shook my head and turned away. I didn't go home with Laura that night. Didn't follow up with any of the guests. I got in my car, drove aimlessly for an hour, then pulled over into an empty grocery store lot and just sat there with the engine running, staring at the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just went quiet inside. Like a fuse had blown and everything went dark. The betrayal wasn't sudden. That was the worst part. It had been slow, calculated, spread out over weeks, maybe months, eroding little pieces of me until there was nothing left to salvage. Back home, I found one of Zach's sweatshirts in the laundry basket. Not mine. His. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. I went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and started pulling her things off hangers. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't ready to throw her out, not yet. But I needed space. I needed room to breathe without choking on the smell of her shampoo or the sight of her coffee mug. I grabbed a suitcase from the top shelf, left it on the floor, and shut the door. She came home later that night. Didn't even ask where I'd gone. Just walked past me in silence and went upstairs. She didn't cry. She didn't say sorry. She just acted like this was the way it had always been. 2 days. That's how long it took for the silence between us to harden into something permanent. We didn't speak. Not about what happened in the parking lot. Not about her holding Zach's hand. Not even about the look she gave me, the one that said, "I'm already gone and you're just catching up." On the morning of the second day, I got a text. Not a face-to-face conversation. Not a phone call. A message. "Laura, you're being emotionally unstable about this. You're blowing everything out of proportion. I can't talk to you when you're like this." That was the word she used, unstable. As if I'd lost my mind. As if the past few weeks had all been some delusion I conjured out of jealousy and insecurity. As if she hadn't crossed every unspoken line between two people who once promised not to hurt each other. And Zach? Nothing. No text. No call. Not even a "Hey man, I didn't mean for this to happen." Just silence. The kind of silence that confirms everything you feared. I didn't respond to either of them. I didn't scream or beg or explain how much it hurt. I didn't try to make them feel guilty. I just got up, grabbed my laptop, and started apartment hunting. By that afternoon, I had signed a short-term lease on a studio across town, small, a little beat up, but clean. It was on the edge of Seattle, not far from where I used to live before Laura. It felt like stepping back into an old skin I hadn't worn in years. That night, I didn't even tell her I was leaving. I packed the essentials: clothes, my keyboard, a few books, and a box of records. Everything else could wait. I left her a note on the kitchen counter that said nothing poetic. Just facts. "I'm moving out. You'll get the papers soon." The next morning, I woke up to another message from her. "Laura, you forgot your blue hoodie. And the charger in the hallway outlet. Also the spare keys." No mention of the relationship. No apology. No effort to stop me. Just a list of items I'd forgotten, like I had just walked out after a normal argument and not after watching her emotionally unravel a decade of marriage in broad daylight. That kind of detachment, it hit harder than yelling ever could. There was something so chilling about how practical she became the moment I left. As if she'd been waiting for it. As if she already had a plan for life after me. I didn't text back. I blocked her number. Not out of anger, but out of preservation. Because I knew if I gave her an inch of access, she'd nize it. She'd twist the story, make herself the victim, turn the betrayal into a misunderstanding. No, not this time. I filed for divorce that same day. Quietly. No Facebook status updates. No venting to mutual friends. I hired a lawyer, paid the retainer, and gave them everything they needed to make it clean. What surprised me most wasn't how easy it was to start the paperwork. It was how easy it was to emotionally disengage. I didn't realize how far gone I already was. How long I had been sleepwalking through a marriage held together by obligation and routine. I think a part of me had already started grieving the loss before the betrayal even came to light. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. The hardest part was telling my parents. They loved her. Especially my mom. Laura was the daughter she never had. When I called to break the news, I expected questions, arguments, disbelief. But what I got was something different. My mom was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said, "I wondered. For a while now, I wondered." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we noticed the distance. The way she stopped looking at you when you spoke. We just didn't want to interfere." I didn't know what to say to that. Relief? Sadness? Anger that no one told me? All I could do was nod into the silence, even though she couldn't see me. Later that week, I drove to their house to drop off some of my old things. Childhood boxes, albums, stuff I didn't want cluttering up the new place. When I walked in, my dad gave me one of those nods only dads can give. Equal parts, "Sorry this happened," and "You'll survive." He didn't say anything until I was on my way out. Then he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You didn't lose anything worth keeping." That hit me hard. Not because it felt cruel, but because it felt true. In the days that followed, I tried not to think about her. I made a rule. No rereading texts, no checking social media, no asking friends for updates. The only way to reclaim my life was to live it in the present. Not pick through the ashes of what used to be. And still, the silence echoed. Not just hers, but mine. My phone barely buzzed. My inbox was quiet. It was like the moment I walked away, the world agreed to give me space. I didn't realize how much noise I had been living with, how much effort it took to maintain a life that wasn't working. I started going to bed early. I stopped drinking coffee after noon. I read. I cooked small meals for myself. I walked to the corner store for groceries instead of driving. Every choice felt deliberate, like I was learning to exist again in the absence of her orbit. And maybe that's what real aftermath looks like. Not fireworks, just stillness. The absence of someone who used to be everything. And the slow, quiet rediscovery that maybe they weren't everything after all. Starting over isn't like flipping a switch. It's not clean. It's not immediate. It's more like untangling a necklace chain that's been knotted for years. Slow, frustrating, full of moments where you wonder if it's even worth it. But piece by piece, something in me started to loosen. The studio apartment I moved into was nothing special. Bare walls, creaky floors, a view of a brick wall across the alley. But for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence in my space wasn't suffocating. It was mine. No low-grade tension humming beneath the surface. No wondering if I'd walk in on some subtle betrayal dressed in politeness. No pretending. Just me. I picked up a consulting job with a local agency that did health and safety checks for small cafes and coffee shops. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. It also gave me a reason to move. To show up somewhere new each day. Clipboard in hand. Meeting people who didn't know me as the guy whose wife left him for his brother. Funny how grounding the ordinary can be. On my off days, I started swimming at this little community lake about 20 minutes from the city. Not laps, just slow, deliberate movement through the water. Something about being submerged, about the sound disappearing under the surface, gave me the kind of clarity therapy never had. The phone stayed on silent. Most days it stayed in a drawer. People I hadn't talked to in years started reaching out. Old college friends. Coworkers I hadn't seen since before the pandemic. Apparently the news of the divorce traveled fast. Faster than I expected. I didn't give details. Just said we'd grown apart. No one needed the mess. But when I visited my parents that weekend, it was a different story. They were sitting out on the porch, Dad nursing a cup of tea, Mom flipping through one of those magazines she never actually reads. I sat with them in the fading light, not saying much, just letting the cicadas do the talking. Then my dad said, almost offhandedly, "You know, we knew something was off with her. We just didn't want to interfere." I looked over at him. "You did." He nodded slowly. "The way she stopped showing up to family stuff. Always had an excuse. Always looked like she had somewhere better to be. We didn't want to believe it was personal. She was distant even with you guys. She was," my mom said, sighing, "but we figured you'd see it in your own time." I wanted to be angry, wanted to ask why they didn't say something sooner. But instead I just nodded. Because the truth was I had seen it. I just didn't want to face it. Denial isn't always about ignorance. Sometimes it's about hope. And hope can blind you worse than anything. That night I slept for 9 straight hours. No dreams. No jolting awake. Just stillness. I woke up before the sun, made coffee on the old drip machine they never replaced, and sat out on the back deck with a blanket and the morning chill. I watched the fog rise off the lake behind their house like it had every morning since I was a kid. And I realized I missed this. The simplicity of it. The realness of it. All those years I thought I needed to build something shiny to feel accomplished, a perfect marriage, a downtown condo, a life you could show off at dinner parties. But in the end, what saved me wasn't any of that. It was a cup of coffee in the cold. It was knowing my parents saw the truth before I could. It was the quiet. I started journaling again, nothing dramatic, just thoughts, patterns, flashes of things I needed to understand. One entry I wrote that stuck with me was this. If someone tells you the house is on fire, you don't wait to see smoke. You pack up and go. I waited for flames. That's on me. I reread it often. Not to shame myself, but to remember that clarity always comes, sometimes later than we'd like, but it comes. Laura didn't reach out again, at least not directly. A mutual friend texted me weeks later saying she and Zach had opened a small joint studio in Capitol Hill. Photography and branding services. I didn't react. Didn't even finish reading the message. I deleted it and moved on. They had their life. I had mine. And mine was finally starting to feel like something worth rebuilding. The divorce went through faster than I expected. No messy fights, no mediation, just a quiet dissolve of what used to be everything. I didn't contest anything. No alimony, no property battles. I just wanted out. Laura barely looked at me during the final meeting. Zach didn't show. A month later, I heard from a friend that their studio launch had hit a snag. Apparently, Laura had recycled my old business proposal templates for their investor pitch, the same documents I used for my work consulting cafes. Someone flagged it. There were compliance issues. Even whispers of financial misreporting. Nothing criminal, but messy enough to shake their shiny little empire. Laura emailed me. Said it was a misunderstanding. Asked if I could clarify the original authorship. Said I was being petty by staying silent. I didn't reply. Sometimes justice doesn't need courtrooms or revenge plots. Sometimes it just means standing still and letting the truth do the work. Now I live about an hour south of the city, near Tacoma. Quiet little place near the woods. I adopted a dog, Rusty, who's smarter than I am and reminds me to slow down. I keep to myself. Swim in the mornings. Cook real meals again. There's a plaque on my office wall that says, "Some bridges burn you. Others save you." It was a gift from my sister. I didn't get it at first. I do now. There's a woman I've started talking to, nothing serious. She's a vet. We met at a local training seminar. We text. Sometimes call. No pressure. Just simple connection. Honest laughter. I don't know what the future looks like. But for the first time in a long while, I don't need to. I've stopped looking back. And I've stopped waiting for someone to hand me peace. I built it myself.